Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Required Reading. As always, I'm Russ, and today we're going to continue our read of Ghostbusters The Return. This week we're on lucky number 13, chapter 13. The mayor hadn't felt this good in days. At last, things were finally getting back to the way they should be. Oh, it was too soon for the polls to shift all the way back yet, but Lipinski was confident that it was only a matter of time. Hiring Goodraven had been a masterstroke. Bringing in a new spook hunter, a better spook hunter, knocked out the only aspect of Venkman's campaign that might conceivably have made him a threat. "Mr. Mayor," said Wong, "you claim to represent the common man. Yet just last year you pushed through legislation that nearly doubled the increases that were allowable under the existing rent control guidelines. How do you respond?" "An excellent question, Nate. Thank you," the mayor replied from behind his podium. "My opponent would like to twist the facts to make you believe that this legislation hurts the common man, when nothing could be further from the truth. Who are the landlords in New York? This stereotype says they're corporate fat cats or faceless holding companies. But really, many landlords are the little people like you and me. Like Molly Jan Kidoff of Queens or Anna Day of Staten Island. They're ordinary working people, many of them elderly, who've scrimped and saved their entire lives just to own the building they live in. They rent out parts of those buildings to others just to be able to make ends meet. As we all know, making ends meet is getting tougher and tougher these days. Why, the cost of heating oil alone has risen 14% in the last 10 years. Outdated rent control laws have prevented these hard-working New Yorkers from keeping up with their own rising costs. My opponent would like to keep it that way, punishing good people for the crime of pursuing the American dream. Now, maybe he's just naive. Maybe he's just new to the issues and probably doesn't understand them fully. But personally, I think we need to give a fair shake to all New Yorkers. We need to keep rent stable for tenants without draining the bank accounts of their slightly more fortunate friends and neighbors." Wong applauded. "Great job, Mr. Mayor. That's it for now." With all modesty aside, Lipinski had to agree he had done a great job, indeed. Over the course of the practice session, Wong had hit him with the toughest questions he could. Every unpopular decision, every scandal, and every shortcoming from the past several years. Lipinski had taken every punch and spun every mistake into a virtue. He'd artfully sidestepped inconvenient issues, like the city's spiraling debt or the fact that the corporate fat cats and faceless holding companies were actually the biggest beneficiaries of his new rent control laws. Stepping down from the podium, he asked, "How'd I look, Nate?" "Terrific, Mr. Mayor. Perform like that in the real debate tomorrow, and you'll wipe the floor with Venkman." "That's what I like to hear." "And because you did so well, we have a little gift for you. It just came in an hour ago." He handed the mayor a thick folder of paper. "What's this?" "Peter Venkman's police record." Lipinski grinned like a hungry barracuda. "Just when I thought the day couldn't get any better." He hefted the file in his hand, enjoying its weight. He almost started whistling. He opened the folder and eagerly began to flip through the file. But before he could make it all the way through the first page, an aide approached with a cordless telephone. "Excuse me, Your Honor," said the aide. "The police commissioner would like to speak with you right away. He says it's urgent." Lipinski took the phone and held it to his ear. "Jim, how are ya?" he said in his warmest, most effusive tone. "Thanks very much for sending over Venkman's file. I'm just looking at it." He paused to listen as the commissioner interrupted him. "On Fifth Avenue? Well, Goodraven can handle it. He's on the scene. Good." His face went pale, then beet red. He lost his grip on the thick file in his hand. A flurry of papers fell to the floor like snow. "Goodraven did what?" The good news was that Goodraven had fired through the window, so the display caught most of the blast. The bad news was that the blaze was spreading fast. The smoke was already starting to make it difficult to see. The heat inside the store was incredible, hot enough that the sprinklers were doing little more than adding steam to the smoke, and there were 4 cackling ghouls in caps and plaid Bermuda shorts smacking acid-filled golf balls around the store. When you put it all together, the bad news pretty much outweighed the good. "We need to do this quickly," said Egon, ducking below the smoke and flying golf balls. "Isn't that kind of..." Ray coughed several times from the smoke. "Isn't that kind of obvious?" The police were already on the move, staying close to the ground to crawl under the smoke. The captain called out to locate any living people who might have been trapped inside. "Police officers," he shouted, "we're here to rescue you. Call out your location and we'll assist you to safety." Panicked voices shouted back from various parts of the store. "Here! Over here! Help! Please help me!" Poole sighed. The store was big, with plenty of aisles and displays that might hide victims or perps. To no one in particular, he said, "It figures. Just once, why couldn't they all be in the same place?" Then, to the 2 junior officers, he added, "Follow the voices. When you find someone, sing out and get them out of the store. But once you're outside, check whether it's safe before you come back in. We don't need dead heroes today." The younger cops acknowledged the order and headed off to help. Elsewhere in the store, Ray and Egon were already doing their bit. Over in the shoe section, Ray squinted against the smoke to see one of the ghouls rearing back to hit another ball. "4!" shouted Ray, zapping the undead creature with an ion stream that bounded before it could complete its swing. He used his foot to send a trap skidding across the floor. Beneath the ghoul, a flash of white light, and it was gone. "1 ghost down!" Despite the poor visibility, Egon found a second ghoul teeing off in the basketball section. He leveled his neutrino wand and fired, but a sheet of flame leaped up in front of him, spoiling his aim. The ion beam tore through a rack of basketballs. Dozens of the balls exploded from the force of the blast. Others careened madly in all directions. Before Egon could get off a second shot, he was tackled from behind. The unexpected blow wasn't especially heavy, but under the circumstances, it was enough to make him lose his footing and hit the floor hard. The proton pack on his back made it difficult for him to scrabble back to his feet right away. But even before he rose, he managed to grab his fallen neutrino wand and twist around to face his attacker, only to find himself staring into the inanimate face of a dummy in a basketball uniform. With a sigh of relief, he noted that its feet were melted, probably from when it was hit by acid, or perhaps from the heat of the fire. Either way, that was what had caused the accidental tackle. Still, the delay had done its damage. By the time Egon got back to his feet, the second ghoul was gone. Over the roar of the fire, he could hear the young policewoman's voice coming from somewhere to his right. "First hostage clear!" she called. "Second hostage clear!" came her partner's voice from the other side of the store. Egon nodded. That left 3 living people to evacuate, and 3 ghosts left to contain. Suddenly, from out of the smoke, he spotted a golf ball whizzing towards him. He ducked to avoid it, calculated its approximate trajectory back to its source, and fired blindly in that direction. Yet he still couldn't see well enough to know whether his ploy worked. He narrowed his beam and pulled back on the wand like he was landing a bass, and found that he was dragging the bound and writhing ghoul out of the smoke and flames. He stamped down on the pedal of his ecto-trap, and the ghoul vanished inside. "2 ghosts down!" he shouted. Ray was in the middle of binding the 3rd ghost when he heard Poole's voice from somewhere near the entrance. "Hostages 3 and 4 clear!" Ray triggered the trap. "3 ghosts down!" he called back. Almost done. Just 1 more person and 1 more ghost, Ray thought, wiping the sweat out of his eyes. "We're gonna do this. It's gonna work." As if on cue, the fire at the front of the store took its toll. Weakened by the flames, the plaster and wood in the ceiling began to crack and buckle. With a deafening roar, massive chunks of the burning debris gave way and fell from the ceiling to block the door. Ray's mind started racing as he tried to think of alternate routes to get out of the building. Maybe there's a rear exit, or... But he dropped the train of thought when he heard the screams. Trying as best he could to avoid the flames that were sprouting all around, he followed the sound. He soon found that it was coming from a tent that was set up as a part of a display in the middle of the camping section. It sounded like a woman inside the tent. Ray figured that she'd probably taken cover inside when the golf ball started flying, but the strategy backfired when the tent caught fire, trapping her inside. He needed to get her out, but he couldn't open the burning tent flaps with his hands. Desperately, he searched around for some kind of tool that he could use. Sleeping bags, lanterns, camp stoves, all useless. Then his eyes lit on a rack of fishing poles. Ray put down his ectotrap and grabbed one of the poles and cast toward the tent. The hook caught in the canvas of the tent flap. Gingerly, being careful not to dislodge the hook, he pulled back on the pole. Slowly, the tent flap rose. By the light of the flames, he could see a saleswoman huddled inside the tent, her head buried in her arms. "It's all right," he called to the woman. "We're gonna get you out of here. I'll hold the door. Just crawl out carefully and stay away from the walls." The saleswoman didn't lift her head. She just kept sobbing and screaming. "She can't even hear me. She's hysterical," thought Ray. "You can make it, but I can't let go to come get you. You've got to do it." She didn't move. With a sinking feeling, Ray realized that the only way she'd make it out of the blazing tent was if he got her out himself. Meanwhile, Egon was making his way through the store, holding his PKE meter in one hand and his Neutrona wand in the other as he searched for the last ghost. So far, he hadn't found a trace. The reading on the meter indicated that it was still around somewhere, but the golf balls had stopped flying, and the ghost seemed to be lying low. Still, he couldn't afford to give up the hunt, even though the fire had spread throughout the store by now. The last thing they needed was to have the ghost pop up unexpectedly to stop them from escaping. Suddenly, the indicator on the PKE meter jumped. Egon stopped in his tracks and slowly swept the meter around his body until the reading jumped again. With the smoke and flames, he couldn't see more than a couple of feet in front of him, but he set off using the PKE meter like a compass and watched the reading. The limited visibility made it difficult for him to see which way he was going, but from his crouched position he could see enough of the merchandise near the floor to realize that he was heading into the golf section. In retrospect, it seemed like the obvious place to look. Without warning, another dummy, this one dressed in golf clothes and holding a 9-iron, toppled forward out of the flames. It knocked Egon to the floor, landing on top of him. He started to push it off of him, only to find himself staring into the glowing red eyes. Pseudo-organic possession. The dummy raised the 9-iron over its head and started to bring it down. Egon didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he simply pulled the trigger on his Neutrona wand, which was pressed up against the dummy's chest. At point-blank range, the ion stream blew the plastic body to bits. When the shrapnel cleared, all that was left was a ghost howling in helpless rage within the grip of Egon's ion stream. "Last ghost down!" shouted Egon. Ray couldn't see Egon through the blaze, but he heard him. "Great!" he called back, still holding the fishing pole in place. He coughed several times. The smoke was getting worse. "Now, follow my voice fast. I need some help." "In a minute. I can't let go of the ghost." "Stick it in a trap." "As soon as I find one, I fell and dropped it." Grimly, Ray realized that there was no way for him to get help in time to save the woman in the tent. The police couldn't get back in through the debris that had burned in front of the door, and until Egon could get the ghost into a trap, he was as helpless as Ray. Ray was going to have to do this one alone. Constantly checking to make sure that the tent flap was still open, he stepped backward while slowly letting out more of the fishing line. When he reached a bank of shelves full of camping gear, he managed to wedge the fishing pole among the products on one of the shelves. As gently as he could, He let go of the pole. It held. The pole stayed in place, holding the tent flap open. Still coughing, Ray raced over to the tent and got down on his hands and knees. He knew that if he let his clothes come into contact with the flaming tent, it could spell disaster. So he got as close to the floor as he could possibly and inserted his head and shoulders into the tent. "It's okay," he told the sobbing woman. "Come on, let's get out of here. Together." He laid his hands on her shoulders, and the human contact alone had a helpful effect. Without opening her eyes to look at him, she clung tightly to his arms, as much for emotional support as physical comfort. "Keep your head down," he said, guiding her through the doorway of the tent. Once they were clear of the tent and up on their feet, Ray's thoughts turned back to finding an alternative escape route. He squinted into the smoke and flame, but he couldn't see far enough to spot any other exit doors. He wiped his brow to clear away the sweat that came at least as much from the tension as from the heat. And that's when he saw it. The blaze had spread past the camp stoves. It was closing on the tanks of butane fuel that stood behind them. "Egon!" he shouted. "We gotta get out of here now! It's gonna blow!" "On my way," came the reply. With one arm around the saleswoman's shoulders and his other gripping the cord attached to his ecto-trap, Ray started to run. He had a fairly good idea of where the front of the store was, as long as he stayed on course while dodging around pockets of fire along the way, but he had no idea how they'd get out once they got there. Their path converged with Egon's as they approached the front of the store. Egon was still towing the ghost in his ion stream as he ran. "I'm open to ideas," said Ray. "That makes two of us," Egon replied. Keeping one arm around the saleswoman, Ray pulled out his Neutrona wand with the other. He blasted the window, shattering it into a hail of tiny glass fragments. "Out the window!" said Ray. "It's still burning up there." "No choice! On the count of 3! Just then, a powerful jet of water blasted in through the broken window. It sizzled into steam as it came into contact with the fire. "The fire department," said Egon. Ray brought the saleswoman into the outer edges of the jet of water. On the fringes there was enough water to get soaked, without getting bowled over by the force of the pressure. Egon followed close behind. "There they are!" shouted a voice from outside. "Try to stay in the spray on your way out," Egon told Ray. "Right." The soaking wouldn't protect them from the fire for long, but then again it didn't have to. The trio took a running start, jumped up into the window display, and kept going. They burst out into the sunlight, arm in arm, with Egon towing the last ghost behind. A rush of cool, fresh air hit them as they reached the pavement. After the inferno in the store, the change in temperature felt like bathing in ice water. "Keep going!" shouted Ray. "We need distance before those tanks blow!" They had just cleared the curb when the butane tanks caught fire. The explosion ripped through the store and shattered the windows all up and down the block. The force of the blast knocked the Ghostbusters and the saleswoman flat on their faces and sent them tumbling across the blacktop. But at least they were alive. Despite his aches and pains, Ray didn't think he'd broken any bones. Slowly, and with some effort, he looked up to see that the crowd outside had multiplied. Police backup had arrived, along with 3 fire engines and their crews, a team of emergency medical technicians, and the usual assortment of news reporters and rubberneckers that mass destruction always brought along. Through it all, Goodraven stood impassive, in precisely the same place where he'd been the entire time. He seemed oblivious to the chaos raging all around him, and turned only slightly to watch the Ghostbusters go sprawling into the street. Somehow, Egon had managed to keep a tight grip on his Neutrona wand through the blast and through the fall. If he let his fingers slip for even an instant, the ghost would get free and the whole thing would start all over again. "Ray," he said, "do you suppose you could get me a trap?" A short distance away, the police captain was jamming a finger into Goodraven's chest and hollering at him. Poole had decades of practice in intimidating people, even when the top of his head only reached the middle of their chest. But Goodraven was a whole different story.
"Are you nuts?" he shouted. "You could have killed somebody. What was that?"
"That," Goodraven said in a calm, even tone, "was the Lord's work. His will be done." The captain pulled out a pair of handcuffs.
"You're coming downtown, freak. We've got you on arson, reckless endangerment."
"I think not."
"Oh, you don't, do you?"
"Nay, I merely fulfilled the task assigned me by the mayor of your city." Poole glanced over at the news cameras behind the police barricades. He imagined leading the mayor's new golden boy away in handcuffs. Next, he imagined his pension evaporating before his eyes. Goodraven suddenly raised a finger, as though he just remembered something. "Ah," he said. "Nay, but I misspoke. Your pardon." Goodraven strode over to where Ray and Egon were lying on the ground, but he didn't give them so much as a glance. Instead, his unflinching glare was directed at the ghost hovering in the grip of the ion stream. He stared long and hard into the specter's empty eye sockets. It was the first time that Ray had ever seen a ghost look scared. And, as it turned out, for good reason. Goodraven's hand shot out to grab the intangible wraith by the throat. He started to mutter under his breath in a language other than English. His eyes became even more intense. The ghost let out an inhuman shriek of terror and burst into bright orange flame. For a moment it howled in pain and fear, then it was gone. Goodraven walked briskly back to the captain. "Now have I fulfilled the task assigned me by mayor of your city." Without another word, he picked up the flamethrower, replaced it in his sack, and left. The reporters thronged around him as he reached and passed the barricades, but he simply walked purposely away until they gave up and stopped following.
"What do you mean we can't find him?"
the mayor roared. The aide drew back reflexively, although he apparently managed to fight the urge to flee the building. We tried to patch through police channels as soon as word came through, but apparently he already left the scene."
"Well, he's gotta go home sometime. Call him."
"We can't."
"We can't? Why not?"
"Mr. Goodraven never filled out an application. We don't have his phone number."
"What?"
In a small voice, the aide said, "He was supposed to come in to fill out his paperwork today."
"He was supposed to fill it out today. That's just dandy," shouted Lipinski. "How are we supposed to fire this idiot if we can't even get a hold of him?"
The aide shrugged helplessly.
"Send him an email. Put out search parties. Shine a signal in the sky if you have to."
"We could spread word through the media
and let everyone know that we can't keep track of our own crazy exorcist. Out of the question."
Lipinski turned to Wong, the police commissioner, and the commissioner of the Office of Emergency Management. Up until now, they had all been doing their best to stay invisible on the other side of the room. Even the police commissioner flinched.
"We need heavy-duty damage control. I want Goodraven found now. I want a statement for the press that distances us completely without sounding like we made a mistake. We gotta take care of this before this idiot pulls something like this again."
He glared at them.
"Make me happy, gentlemen, because if we don't pull this off, we could all be out of a job."
It didn't take too long for the emergency medical technicians to get Egon and Ray back up to speed. Little oxygen helped combat the effects of the smoke inhalation. A little first aid took care of the minor cuts and burns that they had picked up along the way. More importantly, the fire department managed to clear everyone out of the 12-story building before the fire had spread beyond the store. The only people who'd been in immediate danger were the former hostages, and thanks to the police and the Ghostbusters, all of them were safe now. The fire department still had its hands full extinguishing the fire, but the worst was over.
"You did some good work back there, fellas,"
Poole said, shaking Ray and Egon's hands.
You too, Captain, said Ray.
Listen, the captain said in a confidential tone. For what it's worth, your boy has my vote. Ray was better than Egon at hiding his reaction when they both winced.
Thanks, Captain, he said, forcing a smile.
As Poole walked away to talk to his officers, Egon and Ray headed for the ectomobile. They started to load their gear in the back of the car. The situation is getting worse, Egon said.
I know, said Ray.
We can't continue this much longer without help.
I know.
And we won't get any from that walking anachronism Goodraven.
I know.
That maniac doesn't even know what century he's supposed to be in. His clothes and speech patterns don't even come from the same century.
Not necessarily. Actually, his speech patterns sound like he learned from a King James Bible. People still use those today.
Fine, granted, but nevertheless.
We need help, Ray agreed. And it's not coming from Goodraven.
Precisely.
Ray slammed the ectomobile's rear door closed. They circled around their respective sides of the car and climbed inside. I'll call Peter and Winston when we get back to the office, said Ray. Maybe they've worked out some kind of arrangement by now.
And if not?
Let's cross that bridge when... Both of them jumped a bit when the car phone rang. Ray reached for it. Hello?
Dr. Stantz?
Janine's familiar nasal tones came through the receiver. Janine? Ray said, concerned. You're not under attack again, are you?
No, we're fine. Well, Lewis has the sniffles from all those dusty books. And it's not like there any ghost to anything. I've been trying to reach the two of you for half an hour.
We've been a little busy.
Well, I found something.
On Xanthador?
Uh-huh.
Hang on a minute. Ray hit the speakerphone button so that Egon could hear what she had to say. Okay, go ahead.
It turns out we were looking in the wrong place. We were figuring it'd be back in ancient Rome or Mesopotamia, something like that. I found something in this diary from right here in the U.S. and... When is this from? 1627.
Xanthador's American? Said Ray. Not necessarily, Egon noted. More likely an import, part of the belief system of some early immigrant. What does the entry say? Ray asked.
Well, I can't read all of it. Between the smeared ink, the handwriting, and the funny spelling, it's kind of hard to make out.
What can you read? Asked Egon.
It's something about somebody showing up from some colony that got wiped out. Apparently he was babbling about fear and a demon named Xanthador who came from ancient Bab something.
Babylonia? Said Egon. Or Babel? Said Ray. The way things are going, it could be Babylon, Long Island, Egon said with a sigh.
Anyway, said Janine, it looks like they wrote the whole thing off to Satan, and they were gonna send someone to check it out.
What happened? Asked Ray.
I don't know, it doesn't say,
said Janine. Try looking a week or so later, suggested Egon.
I did, I couldn't find anything. But it looks like there's some pages missing.
Does it say who they sent? Asked Egon.
I think so, but the ink's smeared and the page is torn.
So much for getting a lead that way, said Egon. All right, thanks, Janine. Good work, said Ray. Why don't you two focus on sources that deal with ancient Babylonia for now? Maybe we'll find more there.
Roger,
said Janine. We'll be back soon. See you later, said Ray.
Bye.
Egon hit the button to break the connection. Not much to go on. No, but it's more than we had before, said Ray. The diary mentioned fear. Do you suppose it could be some sort of fear demon?
Could be, unless it just meant that they were scared out of their gourds when the whole town was slaughtered. But a fear demon would make sense. How so? Well, whatever's going on, it sure is spreading a lot of fear. Egon picked up on the thread. And even in normal times, urban legends cause fear. They make people nervous anyway, so maybe Xanthador's doing all this to spread fear. Or, said Egon, Xanthador's feeding off the fear. Ray considered that for a bit. Of course, this is all just a theory, he said. Absolutely. We'd need more information to prove or disprove it. And even if it's right, yes, we still have no idea how to stop it. True, said Egon. But given that the United States still exists, and hasn't yet been renamed the United States of Xanthador, I think we can assume that someone or something stopped it in 1627. So it can be stopped, presumably. Well, that's encouraging, I guess. Now we just have to figure out how. Ray reached down and started the ignition. Let's hit the books.